Donald Trump is a criminal who is creating this crimogenic environment, building on the Supreme Court essentially legalizing extortion and bribery.
Mic check, and welcome back to Corruption Inc. My name is Eric Vaughan, and at the top of the stack today is no kings, as in why. I've been hearing that a lot from people, especially people who are skeptical of the usefulness of these rallies, as well as people who are completely antagonistic towards them. And there's even some people who are sort of like amenable to them, but are just trying to figure out, what exactly are we protesting here? I mean, the obvious answer is that we have a president who, at least a great many people, can say up to 5 million people in this country, all agree that has fashioned himself with the powers of a king. What occurred to me at that point was that everything that I know about Donald Trump, I know from either articles that I've read, shows that I've watched, social media that I've gotten into, stuff online that I've read, and then just like kind of directly, from him, and then reading several of the different pieces that are coming out of the government that are, shall we say, entertaining his perspective. And it also occurred to me that the vast majority of people that I know out there, whether they're for Trump or against him, also have basically a very similar limited screen side view of who this man is. And so I thought that it was really important to find somebody to bring to you who doesn't have that perspective, who has something a little bit deeper. And so I spoke to Pulitzer Prize winning investigative journalist David Cay Johnston. David Cay Johnston is a journalist who's written several books about Donald Trump, including The Making of Donald Trump, Donald Trump, It's Even Worse Than You Think, and I think most recently, The Big Cheat, How Donald Trump Fleeced America and Enriched Himself. So certainly he has a perspective. But that perspective isn't from stuff that he's heard secondhand. He's, in every single one of his books, have those books facilitated by long conversations that he's actually had with President Trump, or even before he was president. And so I think that it's great to actually be able to talk to somebody who has actual, experience, personal experience with the man himself, whom we've been protesting with these rallies called No Kings. We were able to ask David Cay Johnston to be on our show, and he graciously accepted. And so we'll be talking with him and William K. Black, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. All right. So we're here today with David Cay Johnston. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter who's covered Donald Trump in several books and articles. And he's also a professor at the Rochester Institute of Technology. And then, of course, with friend of the show, Bill Black, who is a white-collar criminologist, economist, and author of the seminal book, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm really happy to have you on, and we're sort of on as news is sort of happening. The market's just barely closed, and it looks as though, as the way you put it earlier when we were speaking, David, it looks like Trump blinked.
Well, yeah, so the reason the market shot back up significantly as we're nearing the close for the day is because he walked away from the 10% blanket tariffs, and now he's working on targeted tariffs, with China being his primary foe here. And in any long-term fight between the highly educated, very strategic communist leaders in Beijing, and the idiot prince in Washington, the commies are going to do better.
Yeah. I mean, it does kind of give a sense that Trump's making it up as he goes. to a
Oh
large
yeah. Oh,
degree.
that's how Donald does everything. He's not a strategist. He's not a tactician. He goes on his gut feel, and on top of that, unlike the leaders in Beijing, he is appallingly ignorant, Eric. It's just astonishing what he doesn't know, which is why he's always going to say, I'm a very stable genius. I know more about ISIS than the generals and other ridiculous statements.
Yeah, well, so Bill, what are your thoughts? I mean, it's like one of the original conversation topics that we are going to have here is that, what is the verdict, on the tariff policy? It looks as though there's been something of a verdict being given today by the markets themselves.
Yeah, so let me just add on to what David Cay has already laid down as a base. This is a man that lies about everything, and the absolute requirement to become in his circle of influence is your willingness to lie, right? So he's surrounded by liars. And in particular, in the case of Navarro, who was a econ professor at UC Irvine when I was there, getting my PhD in criminology. The man was known to be a farce, right? I mean, nobody respected him. And of course, now we know that I mean, he made up sources because he couldn't find people to agree with him. So he agreed with himself and assigned
Ah.
himself a different name. Now, this should
Remind our
get
viewers
you,
who Navarro is.
yes, but this should get you every publication pulled and, of course, fired from any legitimate institution in the world. Instead, it makes you the principal advisor of the most powerful person in the world. Okay? So that's why when you have a system built on lying, you also get a kakistocracy, which is just a fancy Greek word for the rule by the worst of the worst, right? These folks are pathetically bad. Now, one of the things about tariffs that has been true forever and that economists emphasize, and I mean conservative economists like Cato, right, is that tariffs have always been associated in every country for all the centuries they've existed with widespread corruption. And this is the other appeal, or among the other appeals. I mean, the greatest appeal, of course, is the magic bullet. Right? I'm smarter than anybody. I'm the art of the deal. I'm the best negotiator. David Cay has already explained that, of course, with Trump, it's always the opposite of any of these projections, right? He isn't just that he isn't the best, he's a terrible negotiator. But he does understand an opportunity for grift. And he also is pathetic in terms of the desire for respect, right? And David Cay can tell you at great length how Trump was never accepted in New York or within the top of the business community as being a person of substance, of competence, any of those type of things. And he's always hated that. So this is going to allows him to do two things. You slap tariffs on. Now, places like Vietnam are going to say, we don't import much from the United States except
Right.
to make things to ship back to the United States. And so, hey, you want no tariffs from us? We'll be happy to do that. Now, what is Trump going to do? What is he already doing? He said, I've got 60, 70, 50, and the number, of course, is made up of these folks because I'm a brilliant negotiator, just caving in immediately because they know I have cojones, right? And of course, it's exactly the opposite. They're playing him, but there will be the whole series of kabuki theater in which they come to the White House and they say nice things and they announce that the tariffs have gone away for the United States, and he will crow as to each victory. And, Fox will come back around
Right.
and
And
say,
meanwhile,
oh
the
my
tariffs
God,
remain in
yes,
place with all
this
of our
man is
most
wonderful.
important
But the
partners.
second thing, of course, is that he is advertising, come and make a deal. Now, not a deal for the United States, a deal for Trump, right? So it's not a surprise that when he kicked this whole thing off, it just, again, they say the quiet part out loud. They scream the quiet part out loud, right? What the hell was he doing? He was down in Mar-a-Lago with the Saudis.
Right.
Now, the Saudis had already bought him with the hotels and with a host of other things, but the latest is perfect for Trump because Trump fancies himself a golfer and he cheats at everything. So he pretends to win and such. So the Saudis know, hey, let's create this tour.
Right. Right.
And
So,
we'll
so
play on your courses and such. And we'll stay in your hotels, and everybody will. And there'll be television cameras talking about the beauty of Mar-a-Lago and one of the best golf courses in the world, none of which is true, of course,
right.
type of thing. So
But it's the
it's
appearance of victory that's
everything
important.
for Donald
Right.
Trump. This is the greatest. The fact that he screwed the entire world's economy, trivial, because it's all about the Donald.
Well, and Eric, Donald also loves to build on Bill's very well-made points. Donald loves to have people bend the knee to him. And what's he been saying? He literally apparently said, based on an interview I did earlier today, apparently said they can kiss my he said they're all coming saying thank you, Mr. President. And of course, that's not what they're doing at all. The problem is we have so many people in the U.S. who are so gullible, so ill-informed about politics, and who are constantly fed nonsense by Fox, Breitbart, OAN, that they buy into this stuff. And Donald isn't getting a good deal for us. Now, in the long run, what he's already done, no matter what happens going forward, is seriously damaging to the long-term economic and national security interests of the U.S. I have a piece up right now on the front page at dcreport.org. That's the news service that I co-founded back in 2017.
We'll have a
And
link below.
it's about all the things that are flowing out of Trump's tariff nonsense. Not, it's the biggest, one of the biggest tax increases of all times, even though he doesn't understand that, and I actually think Donald does not understand that. But I point out things like Canada now, Prime Minister now says the era of America being our closest ally, that's over. And Canadians, including one of my grown children, is a dual citizen and is a lawyer in Canada, are all talking about constantly, is the U.S. going to invade Canada? I don't think that will happen, but that's not a good thing for your immediate neighbor to worry about that. The Mexican government just said, basically, if you fly drones across the border into our country, well, they didn't use this word. They made it clear we could take that as an act of war. What happens if the UK, the EU, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand get together and create a free trade zone? What if they do that and invite China and India as part of it, along with some other Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam? They could create a free trade zone, completely exclude the United States, put onerous tariffs on the US, and we would be in really bad trouble. The US dollar, which Trump keeps denouncing, is, it's no good. He wants us to take our real money and buy fake money, cryptocurrencies with it. He doesn't have any authority to do that, by the way. As best I can tell, the only way he can have cryptocurrencies is those that are seized by the FBI or other law enforcement agencies. But the US dollar is an enormous subsidy to the American people. There are almost 1 trillion greenbacks, physical greenbacks overseas. And so long as those don't come back to the US, that's a gift to us of almost $1 trillion of assets. The problems that I lay out, there are 10 of them I cite. And it's certainly not a comprehensive list, but 10 is enough to really make you recognize how deep and wide this problem is. They go to the very heart of Donald has no idea what he's doing. He doesn't understand any of the major issues in the world. All he knows is I'm special, I'm smarter than everybody else has ever been. You need to do whatever I tell you to do. And so far, we're making a terrible discovery I would really like to hear Bill about. In the first Trump administration, he was openly violating all the emoluments clauses in the Constitution. He was taking money from state governments and their creatures. Cities and counties and the like are creatures of the states. That's prohibited. He was taking money from foreign princes and kings and everywhere else. Now, in both cases, you can only do that if the Congress has passed doesn't say exactly what, it's just Congress has to approve that. I assume a resolution would be sufficient. People went to court over this, and what did the spineless federal judges who got these cases say? You don't have standing. That is, you don't have the right to bring a case. And the implication of those decisions, and I emphasize that qualifier, implication, was that only Congress would have standing to bring this as an issue. And that really said this is an impeachment issue. It's not so you look at that, you look at what's going on with Trump's use when we're not in a state of war of the 1798 Alien Act, which is a wartime act, and other actions. And what I'm struck by is we have an unenforceable Constitution. We have a Constitution whose framers were so careful to think about how do we make sure the rabble don't rise up and do something passionate that messes up the country. We need to allow change. We need to make it difficult so that it takes time, and we're cautious about making change. And what appears to be going on, at least to me, and that's where I'm really hoping Bill, who's an actual lawyer, I just teach law, can tell us, is we're discovering that the Constitution was written on the idea that good people would make decisions. And we now have literally a felon in the White House. And what I'm seeing is a Constitution that is not enforceable except on impeachment.
Now, Bill, before you jump in, I just want to kind of reframe exactly where you're going with this, because just interestingly, I mean, so there's supposed to be like this independence with like the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice, from what I understand, is supposed to be independent of the White House. Like
that's a modern notion, to be clear, Eric.
Okay, all right. But so that was my understanding. And so then Monday night, I guess from what I understand also that it was the White House goes and basically tells the Department of Justice that they will no longer have the crypto enforcement team in place. And so I think so Bill, if you want to go ahead and tackle what David was just talking about, but if we can maybe do that in the context of what we're seeing with the DOJ and crypto.
Okay, so that's another hat. Yes, I am a lawyer, and my wife and I were both Justice Department attorneys in the Federal Programs Branch, which would be the one that should be defending these actions, but noticeably they're not, which means they don't trust and they can't get the people of the Federal Programs Branch yet to do so, which is interesting in itself. Our shop was designed to take priority challenges to federal statutes and regulations and executive branch actions, right? So we're the ones who are, expert in those kinds of things. I will suggest also for future, one of my wife's colleagues at University of Minnesota is Richard Painter. And Richard Painter is the real expert on the emolument clause and is, frequently on top media things explaining it. But David Cay is just plain right, and Richard Painter has made this very clear. I would say I concur with David Cay that the idea of the Justice Department as separate is a more modern tradition, but modern now is 60 plus years of this. So everybody who is a judge or justice grew up under that tradition but it's also been a Federalist Society desire to kill through what they in jargon call the unitary executive theory, which says basically the president's kind of a king, within the executive branch, and they have really expansive view of what the federal executive branch can do. The president can make all decisions, including who will be prosecuted, who will not be prosecuted, who has been prosecuted by prior presidents, and will then let them out, even though they're guilty as hell, and they make none of the normal things that, again, had become norms over 70 years of the pardon attorney, where there were actual processes and standards, and whether you would give somebody a pardon, one of which was the acceptance of guilt,
Right.
unless there had actually been a true miscarriage of justice and such. So I would
What do you
slightly
think about
disagree.
enforceability, Bill?
Right. I would slightly disagree in that and I don't believe that it's actually going to end up as a disagreement. The framers made absolutely clear that you couldn't trust people.
Yeah.
The framers are really clear on that, and in particular, powerful people. So no, the Supreme Court has had to do violence to what the Supreme Court claims it interprets the Constitution, right? So personally, I've been a bit weird in the legal community. Not weird, but unusual, in that I've believed my entire adult life that the Supreme Court is the most overrated institution in America. The whole idea of making it anti-democratic was that it would be a bulwark against the excited passions of the public.
Yeah.
And that's precisely when it always fails,
Right.
right? When the excited populace was willing to, in turn, which is to say, destroy in many ways, because they destroyed the businesses and such of Japanese Americans. The Supreme Court, in an absolutely scandalous series of opinions, approved this, and with outright lying to the court by the executive branch. I mean,
Yeah, although at the time we didn't know they were outright lying. We know
no,
that.
some of them, no, the people making the lies knew
Oh,
that
the people making the lies
Right.
knew they were lying. The court didn't know they were being lied to.
right.
At
The
the time.
court didn't know, but the executive branch
The liars
certainly knew. And by the way, that's in our pantheon of heroes. The guy that's really pushing this is Warren, Earl Warren,
Right.
in his role as governor of California as well. So, and obviously on race, it's just been appalling. And it not only refused to use the civil rights amendments as intended to protect the freed men, it used it as a weapon against them eventually, because it made corporations people.
Right.
And they got all kinds of rights, which the Supreme Court assiduously not only defended, but expanded at every conceivable opportunity, and is proceeding to do so. So, along your lines, yes, the latest is getting rid of the group within the Justice Department, which is of recent creation, that specialized in going after fintech type frauds. And by the way, I teach the course at Minnesota Law in fintech in such. Fintech,
Well-
financial technology, is a euphemism for all a bigger umbrella of these things.
Right. But if we match that also, though, with the fact that didn't he just pardon a crypto company?
First, we
Oh,
just
yeah.
pardoned a whole series of elite white collar frauds with some of the most stupid statements by the president of the United States, that they were exonerated, for example, in the case of Nikola. Now, and by the way, that's that's an inside tech thingy as well. That's Tesla's first name.
Right.
And so Tesla is a hero in this community as well. But, this one literally, they could never make a truck work. So they literally towed it to the top of a mountain and filmed it coming down. They could also, because they could never get the thing to work, the engine to work with the fuel system that was supposed to be the magic beans in all of this. Secretly, they had a plug into electrical outlets that drove all the electricity, the fancy electricity, which they claimed and such. So these are fraudsters. They are like Trump in that they're not good fraudsters.
Right.
But again, I emphasize from criminology and from my own experience putting these people in, helping to put these people in prison, elite white collar criminals ain't there because they're brilliant. They're there because of their audacity.
Yeah.
Right?
That's one of the most important things Bill has been teaching around the country is that it's audacity that lets you get away with these crimes. It's not being a mastermind criminal. It's just being so audacious. Nobody could believe that you would possibly declare you're going to commit a crime and then go commit a crime. That you would do some of the things we've seen some of the bankers do. Who would possibly do that? Because people can't wrap their head around it. It's like the jurors who couldn't bring themselves to convict Wesley Snipes, even after they were given his 600-page manifesto that justified tax cheating, at least in the mind of Wesley Snipes. They had to be his advisors. It had to be those people. There's this human, we're herd animals, and there's this human tendency to excuse people we see as being in leadership or celebrity positions. And a lot of the white collar criminals like Donald have figured out they can exploit that for their benefit. Bill, I wonder if you think it's going too far to say that what we have right now is a pro-criminal presidency.
Oh, no. It is absolutely trying to create the most criminogenic environment possible. And to put it together with what you both have been talking about, this is going to show up. Again, I usually write about more sophisticated CEO fraudsters who want to be seemingly legitimate. And they go through all kinds of efforts. They get opinions from the top audit firms in the world. They get credit rating agencies to call crap AAA,
Right, the 2008
they get appraisers to
frauds.
vouch for everything. Charlie Keating, by the way, this is like the anniversary of the April 9th meeting of the 5 senators that we're taping this on. They were able to get people who had some ethical constraints because they fed them all this stuff from sophisticated professionals. But Trump has reached the point where he's optimizing in a different way that we have been discussing, which is twofold. One, I am lawless. Get in my way and I will destroy you. I will destroy your children. I will destroy your spouse. I will destroy your business. I will destroy your reputation. And by the way, David, I did see that press conference, and he did say, kiss my ass, about that foreign leaders were kissing his ass. But I got to tell you, the tone, and don't ask me how I know this, was right BDSM.
Yeah.
Yes, it was so sexual.
So,
well, Donald is, one of the key issues about Donald, and I got to get off in just a minute, is that Donald emotionally is a 13-year-old boy and has been his whole life. I refer to his life as Groundhog Day, the nightmare. I mean, every one of us went through a year. We were 11, 12, 13, 14, whenever it was, that we do not want to relive. And Donald was shipped off to the New York Military Academy, which no longer exists, by his father because he was so much of a reprobate and creating so many problems. Dad got tired of him. This was a school that was well known for sexually humiliating new cadets. So God only knows what they did to Donald. And if you listen carefully to what he says, and I've discussed this issue with a number of psychologists, including ones who make their living as forensic expert witnesses, he talks about women like a 13-year-old boy. And he behaves that way. And this is part of this whole issue of who he is. He's this immature child who has, for years, for decades, postured himself as being special, better than all the rest of us, and who now, late in his life, I would tell you he has delusions of grandeur, except he's president of the United States. But he has sucked so many people into this belief system, into believing he's this very stable genius, that he is the world's greatest expert of all time on taxes, even though he's testified under oath, I know nothing about accounting. In order to cover taxes for the New York Times, I had to pretty much learn accounting enough that I, for 8 years, had an appointment at a graduate accounting school teaching, not the details of accounting, but the regulatory principles around accounting. And Donald is managed to, as well, figure out how to use the conventions of journalism against the journalists and the rest of America. I'm not a product of journalism school. I became a professional journalist when I was 17 years old. I was a front page staff writer at the San Jose Mercury when I was 19 years old. And so I didn't go through the training that most people get. So I don't operate the same way. And I'm just appalled at my national colleagues. There's occasionally brilliant articles. The New York Times has done a number of really brilliant articles. The problem is that, you read this brilliant article about what Trump is doing, and you move over one column on the front page, absolute pure garbage. And a failure to recognize that Donald Trump is not a politician with a different point of view. Donald Trump is a criminal who is creating this criminogenic environment, building on the Supreme Court essentially legalizing extortion and bribery, unless you're stupid enough to say, give me the money or else, or I'll give you this money if for doing this. We have created an environment where we have these unenforceable elements of the Constitution, like the emoluments clause, that make those political matters instead of what they should be, which is legal matters. And now we have a Justice Department that is essentially an extension of Donald Trump's ego, his desire for revenge and for retribution, that has become the friend of all sorts of criminals, and he's nowhere near getting down the line. Before I go, the last thing I was going to mention is my previous piece for DC Report, which is still up on our front page, was about how Professor Timothy Snyder, the historian who's an expert on autocracy, is leaving Yale to go to the University of Toronto. Professor Jason Stanley, who wrote How Fascism Works, is going to the University of Toronto. And a third professor, a woman I didn't know, whose area of history is modern Eastern Europe, which by its very nature means she's an expert on autocracy. She's also going to the University of Toronto. And Snyder's been pretty clear. He's going partly because of his concerns as a high-level enemy of as Donald would see it, of the administration. And Jason Stanley does not want, he says, his children to grow up in a fascistic country, and I think that's a very similar statement. And so I've been asked by a lot of people, are you going to go to Canada? I live 90 miles from the Canadian border, and I wrote a piece saying, I'm not leaving. And I'm not. And the thing I hope people in the audience listen to is, don't cower. You don't have to be in the forefront like Bill and me and Tim Snyder and others. You don't have to be in the forefront, but do not cower. That is how autocrats and tyrants acquire more and more power. You have to stand up to them. Stand up behind us and other people. If something happens to us, it's going to happen to us. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. But don't be afraid, don't cower, don't bend your principles, and remember a fundamental rule about white-collar crime and leverage. So long as you don't do something that you shouldn't do, nobody has leverage over you. They only get leverage when you do something you shouldn't have done, and somebody knows that and they can use it against you. So that's all you have to do. It's not that hard. So anyway, thank you, Eric, for having me.
Thank you,
I'm sorry
David.
I got to
really
leave.
Appreciate it. No problem. I hope to see you again soon.
Take care.
Take care.
So, no kings, indeed. What are we getting at with these protests? Based on the conversation we just had, I think that it's quite clear that we see a president who has brought in people who are willing to either ignore the law or smash it completely in order to create an environment where he and his cohorts can go and run roughshod over us for their own financial gain. I think that if I were to encapsulate what the No Kings rallies are all about, it would be that. Now, once again, we can discuss whether or not these rallies are particularly useful. Like, quite often I hear people say, well, what are you asking for? And to be fair, I don't think that that's what these rallies are about at all. Sometimes it's enough that the people are calling out their elected officials for what they see. And it's up to the elected officials to respond. Now, sure, the elected official being called out, in this case Trump, might respond by complete intransigence or just not even caring. But at some point, when enough people make their voices heard, it does actually create political pressure. And I know that there's been a lot of talk, especially amongst my friends on the, both my friends on both the far right and the far left, as far as like the apparent uselessness of electoral politics. And, there's interesting ideas and thoughts concerning that, and there are certainly very powerful points, and maybe if we're lucky we'll explore some of those points here on this show. But I think at some point, though, it's just simply about these rallies, people getting together and understanding that we're all experiencing something common. You're able to look around and see hundreds, if not thousands of people in your local environment, and then go and check your phone or check the TV and find out that you were just one of 5 million people that actually went out to the streets to do this. And it isn't something that just happens on the left. I mean, it's like, let's think about several of the rallies that have occurred from any part of the political spectrum. There's always been space and room for protests, for people to get the word out, and for people to understand that they're part of a community and that they have grievances and they need our government to actually address those grievances. And so I don't think that there's any way that you can necessarily completely dismiss any demonstration when at the core of it is regular people getting together to express their grievances with their government. And that's the whole reason why the United States became the political experiment that it was in order to be able to have the freedom to speak out against your government and have those grievances be addressed. I mean, that's foundational to who we are as a nation. And I think that when we hear No Kings, the reason why it's resonating, the reason why as a term it was able to inspire millions of people to come out into the streets, is because we see so much coming from this administration that is completely antithetical to everything that the United States was supposedly about, with the creation of the Constitution, with the Declaration of Independence, and just every facet of civics that we all learned as kids. So why No Kings? I mean, I think that we just had a discussion as to some of the many reasons as to why. And, once again, I don't want to pretend that any of these issues are completely novel to this president, but I'm also not going to sit here and say that what we're seeing today is the equivalent of what we saw in the last 3 or 4 presidents. It's simply not. And I think that it's the responsibility of people such as myself to call things for what they are. I mean, if you watch the Con, we spend several episodes calling out the Obama administration for completely letting the country down in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. I can talk about like all the different failures of every different Democratic president, going as far back as they go. And I can sing praises of certain things that came out of Republican presidents. It's not about party. It's completely about whether these politicians are in any way, shape, or form living up to their supposed role as statespeople, people who are representing their constituents. And so often is the case that is not. And so often it is not the case. And I think that, we can go into all sorts of different conversations about money and politics. We can talk about how lobbyists have the ear of all of our different politicians, and because of that, it's the lobbyist desires that get placed in front of the queue as opposed to those of the regular everyday people, in any particular community. There's arguments as to how and why that sometimes works, and certainly there's arguments to how and why that is abused and completely, corrosive to everything about how we're trying to run our country. What I do know is that money seems to be at the root of all of our ills. This is an age-old, maxim. Money being the root of all evil. But ultimately, money isn't evil. It's a tool. And that tool can either be used for good or bad. And I think the argument here is that when it's being constantly and consistently used for the betterment of such a small sect of people, and it's done in a way that it's hurting everybody else, then we know that money as a tool is being used for ill good. And I think that generally speaking, whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left, that all we're asking for is that the combined resources of our country be used in a way that's actually helpful to us, and not just this thin layer of people at the very top, the robber barons, the people who are the most powerful and quite often the most corrupt, who are doing everything they can to siphon every single dollar that they can out of the economy and into their pockets. For what? I don't know. But I do know that No Kings is ultimately about that. It's about going up against an authoritarian head of state and going up against the oligarchy that supports it. And those are both things that I personally can get on board with. Anyway, thank you for joining us again. Please like, subscribe, hit the little button, for notifications. If you like our content, please share it. Please get it out to your friends, get it out to your family. The only way we can get the robots to listen to us is by flooding the zone. So please do so as much as you can, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Hey all, become that person nobody dares to argue with. Hit like, subscribe, and that little bell button for notifications. Talk to you soon.